Once upon a time in a beautiful small town called Yugi, life was as sweet as honey. The people of Yugi were like one big happy family. They were kind-hearted and always ready to help each other. If someone dropped their wallet, a friendly stranger would pick it up and return it right away. If a child wandered too far from home, neighbors would bring the child back safely, smiling all the way. In Yugi, there was no need to worry about thieves or troublemakers. People could leave their doors wide open even at night and not a single thing would go missing. The land was rich and fertile, perfect for farming and trading. Everyone had enough to eat and their businesses thrived. Because of this, there was peace and joy in the town. It was the kind of place where laughter echoed through the streets, and everyone walked hand in hand like brothers and sisters. Visitors from nearby towns often marveled at how special Yugi was. They wished they could live there too, but Yugi wasn't just about the land, it was about the people. They were welcoming and generous. No one ever felt left out. One quiet morning, something unusual happened. A stranger, a beggar, wandered into town. The people of Yugi had never seen a beggar before. In their town, everyone had enough, so begging wasn't common. But instead of turning her away or whispering about her, the people did what they always did. They showed kindness. The beggar's name was Femi. She looked so different from anyone else in Yugi. Her clothes were old and torn, hanging loosely on her frail body. Dirt covered her face and hands, and her hair was a tangled mess, clumped together like it hadn't been washed in years. She looked tired, like someone who had walked for days without rest. But what caught everyone's attention the most was her hand, or rather what was left of it. One of her hands was deformed. It was wrapped in dirty, frayed bandages and you could see the scars underneath. It looked painful, as if she had been through something terrible. Femi sat on the ground in the market square. In front of her she placed an old red plate. She didn't shout or demand anything. Instead, she quietly and politely asked for help. "Please, kind people, spare some money for me," she would say, her voice soft and humble. The people of Yugi were moved by her. They couldn't imagine how hard her life must be. Many of them reached into their pockets and dropped money into her plate. Some even brought her food or water. "She must have suffered a lot," they whispered among themselves. "Poor woman. And with only one good hand too." Every day, Femi came to the market in the morning. She would sit in her usual spot, waiting patiently as people passed by. And every evening she would leave just as quietly as she came. No one knew where Femi stayed. Did she sleep under a tree? Did she live in a nearby village? No one could say for sure. All they knew was that she came every morning and left every evening like clockwork. The people of Yugi couldn't help but feel sorry for her. After all, their town was so full of blessings, yet here was someone who seemed to have nothing. To them, Femi was a reminder that not everyone in the world had an easy life. Still, the people of Yugi didn't judge her or push her away. They gave what they could and hoped she would find some peace. Femi, with her red plate and sad eyes, became a part of their market life. A small, quiet mystery in their happy, bustling town. The people of Yugi were full of questions about Femi. No one knew anything about her past. They wondered where she came from, why she was begging, and most of all, what had happened to her hand. It was as if she carried a secret that no one could figure out. One person who was especially curious was a woman named Kachi. Kachi was kind and friendly, and she owned the biggest tailoring shop in the market. Femi often sat right in front of Kachi's store with her old red plate, quietly asking for help. Kachi would watch her from the window, wondering about her life. Whenever business slowed down and Kachi had some free time, she would bring a chair outside and sit next to Femi. She wasn't the type to just watch and wonder, she wanted answers. At first, Kachi tried to make small talk. "Femi, have you eaten today?" Kachi would ask, handing her a small loaf of bread. "Yes, thank you," Femi would say with a polite smile. But she never said much more. Kachi didn't give up. Day by day she would bring little gifts, snacks, drinks, or even lunch from the food vendors in the market. Each time she would sit and chat with Femi, hoping to learn more. "You know," Kachi said one day, "you remind me of someone I used to know. She was quiet like you, but when she finally opened up, she had the most amazing story." Femi only nodded, still keeping her lips sealed. But Kachi wasn't one to give up easily. She kept coming back day after day, showing kindness and patience. Slowly, Femi began to trust her. One quiet afternoon, after weeks of trying, Femi finally spoke. Her voice was soft and a little shaky, but Kachi leaned in, eager to listen. "I wasn't always like this," Femi began. "I once had a happy life. I worked in the city and I was married to a wonderful man. We had beautiful children. We were so happy." Kachi listened closely as Femi's story unfolded. She told Kachi about the terrible accident that had taken everything from her. Her husband, her children, her happiness. Tears welled up in Femi's eyes as she continued. "After the accident, I was in the hospital for a long time. My husband's family came and took all his property. Before I could even recover, they sent me out with nothing. I didn't have money to treat my hand properly, so it got worse. That's how I lost its use." Kachi's heart broke as she listened. "That's so unfair, Femi. How could they do that to you?" Femi shook her head sadly. "I don't know. Since then I've been alone. I've had to beg just to survive." Kachi couldn't hold back her tears. She promised Femi she would tell everyone in the town about her story. And she did. Word spread quickly in Yugi. The people, already kind-hearted, were deeply moved. They began giving Femi even more extra money, more food, and even clothes. Femi always smiled and thanked them warmly. Her polite and cheerful attitude, despite her sad story, made them admire her even more. One day, Kachi came to Femi with exciting news. "Femi," she said, her eyes shining, "the people of Yugi have decided to do something special for you. We want to give you a house and a job so you won't have to beg anymore." Kachi waited for Femi to jump up in excitement. But to her surprise, Femi's face fell. She shook her head slowly and said, "Thank you, Kachi. Thank you, and thank the people of Yugi for me. But I can't accept this. This is not something I can take." Kachi was stunned. "Why not, Femi? This is a chance to start fresh." Femi didn't explain. She only thanked Kachi again and sat silently, staring at her red plate. When Kachi shared Femi's decision with the villagers, they were baffled. Some thought she was being modest. Others said she must have her reasons. Though confused, the people of Yugi respected Femi's choice. They continued to be kind to her, hoping one day she would accept their offer. Weeks went by, and life in Yugi changed in a way no one could have imagined. One day, dark clouds gathered suddenly and the sky grew heavy with rain. The rain poured non-stop for days, and soon the peaceful river that ran through Yugi overflowed its banks. What started as a gentle stream turned into a raging flood. The water swept through the town like an angry beast, tearing down homes and washing away shops. People ran for their lives, grabbing only what they could carry. By the time the floodwaters finally went down, Yugi was unrecognizable. The once beautiful town was covered in mud and debris. Houses were destroyed and the market was in ruins. The villagers were heartbroken. "How will we rebuild?" they asked each other. Life became hard for the people of Yugi. Even though they worked together to clean up and start over, nothing seemed to go right. Their crops didn't grow well, and businesses that had been thriving before the flood now struggled to survive. To make things worse, neighboring towns stopped trading with them. Some people believed Yugi was cursed and they didn't want anything to do with it. The once happy town was now filled with sadness and worry. Families that had lived comfortably before were now struggling to find food. Yugi, which had once been the richest town, had become one of the poorest in a very short time. The villagers were desperate for answers. They went to their spiritual leader, a wise old man named Okeke. "Why has this happened to us?" they asked him. Okeke shook his head sadly. "I do not know," he said. "I have prayed and sought answers, but the spirits are silent." As the days turned into weeks, Kachi realized she needed to do something to help her family. Her tailoring business, like many others, had been destroyed in the flood. She decided to leave Yugi and find work in another town. "I will go to the city," Kachi told her family. "I heard there are luxury fashion houses there and I can work as a tailor. I'll come back every weekend to see you." Her family was sad to see her go, but they knew she was doing it for them. On the day Kachi was to leave, she went to the market to say goodbye to Femi. But when she got there, Femi was nowhere to be found. Kachi asked the other traders if they had seen her. "She hasn't been here in weeks," one of them said. "Yes," another added. "She disappeared around the same time the flood started. No one knows where she went." Kachi was surprised. She had thought that Femi, with all her struggles, might have stayed in Yugi to weather the storm. But Femi had left without saying a word. For a moment, Kachi felt a pang of sadness. She had grown fond of Femi and had hoped to help her one day. But now Femi was gone as mysteriously as she had come. "Well," Kachi thought, "I hope she's safe and doing well wherever she is." She pushed the thought aside and focused on her own journey ahead. With that, Kachi set off for the city. She found work in a new luxury fashion house where she styled wares for long hours every day. The pay wasn't much compared to what she earned before as a business owner, but it was enough to send some money back home to her family in Yugi. Kachi also stayed with a kind friend who offered her a place to live until she could afford her own room. Even though her days were hard, Kachi never complained. She worked diligently, always keeping her family in mind. "I'll make things better for us," she whispered to herself one night as she lay on her borrowed bed. "No matter how hard it gets, I won't give up." And with that determination, Kachi faced each day with hope, even as she wondered about the mysterious disappearance of Femi. One sunny afternoon, as Kachi was busy sewing a beautiful dress at her new job, her boss walked over to her with an excited look. "Kachi," her boss said, "we have an appointment with our highest-paying customer. You'll be coming with me." Before Kachi could even respond, a sleek and fancy car pulled up in front of the fashion house. It was the kind of car that Kachi had only seen in magazines. Her eyes widened as she admired the shiny black vehicle. "This customer must be very rich," she thought to herself. The driver of the fancy car stepped out, dressed in a smart uniform. He walked into the shop, greeted her boss with a polite bow and said, "Madam sent me to bring you to the house. She's looking forward to seeing the new designs." Without wasting time, Kachi and her boss followed the driver to the car. Kachi's heart was racing with excitement. She had never been in such a luxurious car before. As the car sped through the streets, Kachi watched the city pass by, but nothing could prepare her for what she saw next. The car entered a grand estate with tall gates that opened slowly as they approached. Beyond the gates stood the most beautiful mansion Kachi had ever seen. The house was massive, with tall windows, sparkling white walls, and a garden that looked like it belonged in a fairy tale. Kachi gasped. "How can someone live in a place like this?" she whispered to herself. The car came to a stop, and as Kachi stepped out, she spotted a handsome man playing in the yard with two beautiful children. The man was tall and looked happy as he laughed and chased the children around the playground. Kachi couldn't stop staring. "Welcome," the man said warmly, shaking hands with Kachi's boss. The children waved at them with bright smiles before running back to their games. "This way," the man said, leading them into the mansion. As soon as Kachi stepped inside, she felt like she had entered another world. The floors sparkled, the furniture looked like it was made for royalty, and the chandeliers hanging from the ceiling seemed to glow with magic. Kachi held her breath, trying not to look too amazed, but she couldn't help it. They were led into a sitting room where the chairs were soft and comfortable. A maid quickly brought them drinks in sparkling glasses. Kachi sipped her juice, feeling like she was in a dream. Just then, a woman entered the room. She was tall and elegant, wearing expensive clothes, fancy shoes, and a shiny wig that framed her face perfectly. Her jewelry sparkled in the light, and her nails were painted a soft pink. She walked with confidence and grace. Kachi's boss stood up and greeted the woman. The two exchanged pleasantries and laughed like old friends. The woman then turned her attention to Kachi. The moment Kachi saw the woman's face, her heart skipped a beat. She froze, staring at the woman in disbelief. It can't be, Kachi thought. It's impossible. The woman looked exactly like Femi. The same face, the same features. But it didn't make sense. The Femi that Kachi knew was a poor beggar. This woman was rich and glowing with beauty. Kachi's eyes darted to the woman's hands. Femi had one hand that was stiff and unusable, but this woman's hands were perfect. She moved them gracefully as she talked. Femi had dirty, matted dreadlocks, but this woman's hair was neat and shiny. Kachi's boss introduced her to the woman, but Kachi barely heard the words. She couldn't stop staring. Deep down, Kachi felt certain. This was Femi. Somehow, in some way, it had to be her. Kachi couldn't hold back her excitement. She stepped forward quickly and called out, "Femi! Femi! Wow, I'm so surprised to see you here. Where have you been? You just disappeared like that. I was so worried about you." But to her shock, the woman just stared at her with a blank expression. Her eyes showed no sign of recognition. "Who are you?" the woman asked, her voice calm but distant. Kachi froze, confused. Was she wrong? Could this really not be Femi? But no. Kachi was sure of what she saw. The woman had the same face, the same black mole on her cheek in the exact same spot as Femi's. Her voice was identical, soft yet clear, just like Femi's voice. Kachi took another step forward, trying to explain, but before she could say anything, the woman's lips moved slightly. Kachi's eyes caught something that made her gasp silently. The woman had a chipped lower tooth, the same chipped tooth Femi had. This is Femi, Kachi thought to herself. But instead of acknowledging her, the woman turned back to Kachi's boss and continued their conversation as if nothing had happened. It was like Kachi didn't even exist. Kachi stood there, hurt and confused. Why was Femi acting like she didn't know her? Was she ashamed of her past? Or could something else be going on? Her boss noticed the awkward moment and quickly apologized to the woman. "I'm so sorry about that. Please, let's continue." The woman, who now seemed even more elegant and composed, nodded and went on with their discussion. As the conversation continued, Kachi noticed the woman's husband and children glancing at her with puzzled looks. They probably wondered why she had spoken so excitedly. Kachi wanted to explain, but she held herself back. Maybe it wasn't her place. Kachi sat quietly, watching as the children played nearby. They looked so happy, laughing and running around, occasionally calling the woman Mommy, and the man, Daddy. It was clear they were a loving family. "I guess I was wrong," Kachi thought for a moment. Maybe this isn't Femi after all. But deep down, something didn't sit right. Her gut told her this was Femi. Everything about her, her face, her voice, her mole, her chipped tooth, was the same. Kachi decided to focus on her work. She helped take measurements of the children while her boss measured the woman and her husband. Even as she worked, Kachi couldn't stop stealing glances at the woman. When they were done, the woman's husband walked them out politely. The children waved goodbye and the fancy car drove them back to the fashion house. As soon as they got back, Kachi's boss turned to her with a stern look. "Kachi, don't ever do that again," her boss scolded. "You can't be so forward about things you're not sure of. You could embarrass yourself or worse, our business." "I'm sorry," Kachi said quietly, lowering her head. "I just thought I knew her." Her boss sighed and waved it off. "Let it go. Just focus on your work next time." Kachi nodded and went back to her sewing machine. But her mind wasn't on her work. She needed answers. Later that day, she asked one of her colleagues about the woman they had just visited. "Oh, that's Madame Cash," her colleague said, smiling. "She's one of the richest women in the city. She owns the biggest hair industry around here. People respect her so much. She's really powerful." Hearing this made Kachi even more confused. How could a poor beggar like Femi turn into someone as wealthy and respected as Madame Cash? For the rest of the day, Kachi couldn't stop thinking about the woman. Her mind raced with questions, but none of them had answers. Was this really Femi? If it was, why did she pretend not to know her? What had happened to change her life so completely? Even as she tried to concentrate on her work, the thoughts wouldn't leave her alone. She couldn't get the rich woman out of her head. The next week, Kachi accompanied her boss to Madame Cash's mansion for some fittings. As they arrived at the grand house, Kachi immediately noticed something different about Madame Cash. Her face was heavily covered with makeup, almost like she was trying to hide something beneath it. The makeup seemed so thick that it looked like a mask. Kachi stared quietly, wondering why Madame Cash had so much makeup on. It was unusual. But before she could think much about it, her boss handed her some work to do. "Kachi, please clip a temporary drape onto the dress Madame Cash has on for the fitting," her boss instructed. Kachi nodded and got to work. Madame Cash stood still as Kachi adjusted the fabric, but Kachi could tell something was off. Madame Cash seemed tense, her body stiff and uneasy. Her hands clenched tightly at her sides, and her breathing was slow and heavy, like she was trying to stay calm. Kachi felt nervous as she worked, but what truly made her shiver was the hard stare Madame Cash gave her. It wasn't just a look. It felt like a warning, almost a threat. The intensity of Madame Cash's eyes sent chills down Kachi's spine. She quickly looked down at her sewing, afraid to meet her gaze again. When Kachi finished, she stood up and excused herself to use the bathroom. Madame Cash didn't say anything, just nodded stiffly. On her way to the bathroom, something caught Kachi's eye. The kitchen door was halfway open and a cook was stepping out, carrying a large bag like she was heading to the market. But it wasn't the bag or the cook that made Kachi freeze in her tracks. It was the cook's dress. Kachi's heart skipped a beat. She recognized the dress immediately. It was the same dress she had made months ago for her neighbor back in Yugi town. She remembered it clearly. She had sewn it as a gift for her neighbor back in Yugi town, but it didn't fit properly. So Kachi had offered to make her another one and suggested giving the oversized dress to someone else instead of wasting it. Her neighbor had gifted the dress to Femi. Kachi couldn't believe what she was seeing. Why was this cook wearing Femi's dress? She quickly pulled herself together and greeted the cook with a smile. "Good afternoon. That's such a beautiful dress you're wearing. Who designed it?" The cook smiled proudly and said, "Oh, thank you. It was a gift from my Madame Cash. She's so kind to me. I'm her favorite, you know. She always gives me lovely clothes whenever she comes back from her business trips." The cook laughed happily and walked away, but Kachi stood frozen. Her mind was racing. How could this be? The dress was meant for Femi, not for a cook in a rich woman's house. Was this a coincidence? Kachi hurriedly walked back to the sitting room, pretending nothing had happened. She sat quietly beside her boss, trying to act normal, but her heart was pounding. When they were finally done and stepped out of the mansion, Kachi felt an overwhelming sense of relief. As they got into the car and drove away, she let out a deep breath. The entire time she had been in that house, it felt like something heavy was pressing down on her. Now that she was out, she could finally breathe again. But the questions didn't stop swirling in her mind. The dress, Madame Cash's tense behavior, the warning stare. It all pointed to one thing. Back at her friend's place, Kachi could not stop thinking about the cook and the clothes she had seen. Something about the whole situation felt off. No matter how much she tried to focus on other things, her mind kept going back to the dress and Madame Cash. Why did Madame Cash look so much like Femi? Why was the cook wearing that particular dress? And why was Madame Cash so tense around her? As much as she wanted answers, something about the whole situation made her uneasy. But Kachi couldn't help herself. She needed to know the truth. The questions bothered her so much that it began to affect her mood. It was like there was a heavy cloud hanging over her, warning her not to dig too deep. She didn't know what to do. She wanted answers, but every time she thought about confronting Madame Cash, a deep unease crept over her. When the weekend came, Kachi returned to her hometown, Yugi, to spend time with her family. Even as she tried to enjoy the warmth of home, her thoughts kept going back to Madame Cash and Femi. That night, as she sat with her husband after dinner, she decided to tell him everything. She explained about the cook wearing Femi's dress, Madame Cash's striking resemblance to Femi, Madame Cash's cold behavior, and the strange feeling she had the whole time she was in the mansion. Her husband listened carefully but looked just as confused as she felt. "That's strange, Kachi," he said, scratching his head. "But maybe it's just a coincidence. Maybe this Madame Cash just looks like Femi. Are you sure you're not imagining things?" Kachi shook her head firmly. "No, I'm not imagining it. I know what I saw. That woman is Femi. I'm sure of it." The next day she met up with some of her friends in the village. They laughed and chatted about old times, but when Kachi brought up the story, they didn't believe her. "Ah, Kachi, you've been in the city too long," one of them joked. "You're seeing mysteries where there are none. Maybe the woman is just Femi's look-alike." "Yes," another friend added. "People say everyone has a twin somewhere. Maybe this Madame Cash is just someone who happens to look like her." Kachi felt frustrated. No one seemed to understand how much this was bothering her. But deep in her heart she knew the truth. That woman was Femi. She was sure of it. That night, as she lay in bed, Kachi made a promise to herself. She would find out the truth. No matter how long it took or how hard it was, she had to know what was really going on. Why was Femi pretending to be someone else? Why was she so cold and hostile? And why did everything about her feel so wrong? Kachi's thought became an obsession. The mystery consumed her thoughts and she couldn't concentrate on anything else. Finally, she decided to seek help from someone who might have answers. Okeke, the town's spiritual leader. Okeke was known for his wisdom and ability to see things that others couldn't. Kachi hoped he would take her seriously and not dismiss her like everyone else. When Kachi arrived at Okeke's house, she poured out her heart, explaining everything that had happened. She didn't know what to expect, but she needed someone to listen. To Kachi's surprise, Okeke's eyes widened as she spoke. The spiritual leader, usually calm and unshaken, looked genuinely surprised. "Thank you for telling me this, Kachi," Okeke said, his voice calm but serious. Kachi leaned forward eagerly. "What does it mean, Okeke? Am I imagining things or is something really wrong?" Okeke took a deep breath and nodded. "You are not imagining things. I have had my suspicions for a long time, but your story has confirmed them." Kachi's heart raced. "Suspicions about what?" "Femi," Okeke said, his voice low, "is the reason our town has been falling apart." Kachi gasped. "What do you mean? How can that be?" Okeke leaned closer and explained, When Femdi first came to this town, things began to change. Strange things started happening. Bad harvest, families and neighbors fighting, sickness and people losing their fortunes. I believe Femdi is not who she appears to be. She is a prosperity thief. She came here disguised as a beggar, but her true purpose was to steal the blessings of this town. A prosperity thief? Kachi repeated, shocked. Yes, Okeke said firmly. She took from the village and left. The wealth she has does not belong to her. It belongs to this town and other towns she has visited. Kachi sat frozen, unable to believe what she was hearing. Okeke further explained how prosperity thieves like Femdi operated. He said they often disguised themselves as beggars, appearing helpless and sad to attract the sympathy of kind-hearted people. When someone gave them money, they were unknowingly handing over their luck and blessings. From that moment, Okeke said, the person's life would take a turn for the worse. They would start facing bad luck in everything they did. No matter how hard they worked, their efforts would go to waste. All the wealth and success they were supposed to have would be stolen by the prosperity thief. Kachi listened carefully, horrified by what she was hearing. Okeke continued, the thief, on the other hand, becomes rich and prosperous, feeding off the good fortune they steal from others. And as long as people keep giving money to the thief will remain wealthy, while those who help them suffer misfortune. This continues because no one expects a beggar to repay them. Who would think to ask a beggar for money? Okeke explained that the only way to break the curse was for the prosperity thief to willingly give money to someone they had stolen from. Once they give the money, he said, the curse can be broken with a prayer or ritual performed by a spiritual healer like me. This is the only way to restore the blessings and end the bad luck. Kachi nodded, feeling the weight of what she had to do. Okeke looked at her firmly and said, you must go back to Femdi and make her willingly give you money. It will not be easy, but you must find a way. The lives of everyone in Yugi depend on this. Kachi returned to the city with a heavy heart but also a strong determination. She knew she had to fulfill the mission Okeke had given her. The people in Yugi were suffering, and even her own life felt stuck in a cycle of misfortune. She had to find a way to get Femdi to give her money. But things didn't go as she hoped. Every time Femdi came to the fashion house, Kachi noticed something strange. Femdi would give tips to the other workers, sometimes even large amounts of money. She would smile and praise their work, handing them crisp notes as rewards. But when it came to Kachi, Femdi acted differently. Femdi didn't give Kachi a single tip, not even once. She avoided Kachi as much as possible, only speaking to her when it was absolutely necessary for work. If Kachi tried to get close or offer her help, Femdi would wave her off or send her away. At first, Kachi didn't understand why. But then she realized that Femdi must have sensed something. It was as if Femdi knew that Kachi was on a mission and was deliberately keeping her distance. This made Kachi's task even harder. She began to feel frustrated and helpless. How could she make Femdi give her money if Femdi refused to even talk to her? But Kachi didn't give up. She reminded herself of why she was doing this. The people of Yugi were counting on her. They had suffered enough, and it was up to her to bring an end to their misfortunes. Even though Femdi avoided her, Kachi decided to be patient. She kept doing her work at the fashion house, hoping that an opportunity would come. Deep down, she prayed for a breakthrough, something that would force Femdi to notice her and hopefully willingly give her money. The thought of failure scared her, but Kachi refused to let fear stop her. She promised herself that no matter how long it took or how hard it was, she would complete her mission. For her family, for her friends, and for everyone in Yugi, she had to find a way. After months of trying and almost giving up, something unexpected happened. It was a Friday evening and Femdi came to the fashion house for an urgent fitting with Kachi's boss. By this time, most of the apprentices had gone home and only Kachi and her boss were still at work. Femi entered the shop in her usual way, commanding attention, but this time, something seemed different. In the middle of the fitting, Femi suddenly became uneasy. She looked down at herself and realized her monthly flow had started earlier than expected. She seemed embarrassed and quickly asked for help. Femi called out to Kachi's boss, "Please, can you get someone to run an errand for me?" Kachi's boss looked around the shop and said, "Kachi is the only one here. Everyone else has gone home." Femi hesitated for a moment but then sighed and turned to Kachi. "All right," she said. She reached into her purse and handed Kachi some money. "Please run to the superstore nearby and buy me a sanitary pad. Be quick." Kachi was surprised. This was the moment she had been waiting for, even though it came in such an unusual way. She took the money, nodded quickly, and left the shop. As she walked to the store, her heart was racing. She couldn't believe that Femi had willingly given her money. When Kachi arrived at the superstore, she decided to keep the money Femi had given her and used her own money to pay for the sanitary pad. She knew how important it was to take the exact money back to Okeke, the spiritual leader. Once she got the pad, she hurried back to the fashion house and handed it to Femi. Femi thanked her quickly and went to the restroom. After a while, she left the shop and Kachi and her boss closed work for the day. But Kachi didn't go home that evening. Instead, she packed her things and traveled straight to Yugi town with hope burning in her heart. When Kachi arrived in Yugi, the first place she went was Okeke's house. She told him everything that had happened and handed him the money Femi had given her. Okeke took the money and placed it in an open bowl. Then he began to pray. As Okeke prayed, strange things started happening. The earth began to shake, the sky grew dark, and the air felt cold and heavy. It was as if an unseen force was fighting back against Okeke's prayers. Kachi stood in the room, trembling with fear. Suddenly, the bowl began to shake violently, and the money inside seemed to come alive. The money twisted and turned as though it was trying to escape the bowl. Kachi let out a scream, but Okeke did not stop praying. His voice grew louder and his words became stronger. The force in the room seemed to grow weaker, and finally, with a loud bang, the money turned to ashes. The moment the money was destroyed, everything changed. The sky outside brightened, the earth stopped shaking, and the cold air became warm and still. Kachi felt an overwhelming sense of relief, as if a heavy burden had been lifted from her chest. She hurried home to share the news with her family and friends. Word spread quickly through the town, and in no time, people began to notice changes. Shops that had been closed for months reopened. Farmers saw their crops grow healthy and strong. Businesspeople from other towns came back, eager to trade with Yugi once again. The town was slowly but surely coming back to life. For the first time in a long while, there was hope and happiness in the air. Kachi felt proud and grateful that she had played a part in restoring her town's fortune. She knew the journey had been hard, but seeing her people smile again made it all worth it. One bright morning, Kachi visited the city market to buy materials for her tailoring business. Since things had gone back to normal in Yugi town, her business had also started to thrive again. Kachi was excited as she picked out the fabrics she needed, choosing bright colors and soft textures that her customers loved. As she was leaving the market, she thought about the fashion house where she used to work. She hadn't seen her former colleagues in a while and decided to drop by to say hello. When she arrived, they welcomed her warmly, happy to see her after so long. "Kachi, long time no see," they exclaimed as they hugged her warmly. They quickly brought her up to speed with everything happening at the fashion house. But what surprised her most was the shocking story they shared about Madame Cash. "Kachi, you won't believe what happened," one of the apprentices began, her eyes wide with disbelief. One day, Madame Cash came down from her car in the middle of the city market and started shouting like a madwoman. Shouting? Kachi asked, surprised. Yes, the apprentice continued. She was screaming and confessing all her wrongdoings. She said she had been going from town to town pretending to be a beggar, stealing people's luck. Kachi listened closely as the apprentices shared more details. She said that all her riches and success came from the luck she stole from kind-hearted people. But now she has lost everything, another apprentice added. Everything? Kachi asked. Yes, one of them said with a nod. I heard that ever since she lost her powers, her life has been full of misfortunes. Her businesses have collapsed, her cars have been repossessed, and she has no more money. People even said she's living in poverty now, struggling to eat and survive. Kachi was stunned. She thought about all the people who had suffered because of Madame Cash's actions, including her own town. But the apprentices weren't done. They also said she's now suffering from strange illnesses, one of them continued. She has rashes all over her body that no doctor can explain or cure. They spread so quickly and they look really bad. She's also very weak and can barely walk, another added. People say it's like all the pain she caused others has come back to her. Kachi shook her head, trying to process everything she was hearing. The apprentices kept talking, sharing stories about how Madame Cash's fall from grace had shocked everyone. I am sure she regrets everything she did, one of them said. But it's too late now. She's living with the consequences of her actions. As Kachi listened, she couldn't help but think about how mysterious life could be. One moment Femi had everything, wealth, power, and respect. But now she had nothing. One of the apprentices spoke up again, her voice soft and thoughtful. You know, Kachi, this whole thing reminds me of how strange and complex the world is. Even if we don't believe in the supernatural, we can't always deny that it exists. Things happen that we just can't explain. Kachi nodded in agreement. She remembered what she had gone through to save her town and how it felt like a battle between good and evil. She realized that even though Madame Cash had caused so much pain, she was now facing the full weight of her actions. As Kachi left the fashion house that day, she felt a mixture of emotions. Relief that her town was free from Femi's curse, but also a sense of sadness for the woman who had brought so much misfortune upon herself. Kachi knew one thing for sure. Life had a way of balancing itself, and everyone had to live with the choices they made. Moral lesson. This story teaches us that our actions, whether good or bad, always have consequences. It also reminds us to be cautious of the intentions of others and to never exploit the kindness of people for personal gain. In the end, justice prevails, and those who harm others must face the results of their choices. I love you all, and thank you for watching this amazing video. I hope you enjoyed watching as much as I enjoyed creating it. Please don't forget to subscribe, like, share and comment on the lessons you have learned, and also let me know where you are watching from. See you in my next video. Bye.